Laughter hit her before the mop water even settled. Three of them, standing near the nurse's station on the fourth floor of Ridgecrest General Hospital, coffees in hand, lanyards swinging, watching a woman on her knees scrubbing the baseboards outside room 42012. One of them, a charge nurse named Brittany Alcott, leaned toward her colleague and said, loud enough that the entire hallway could hear, "At this rate, she'll finish that wall sometime next century." The other two laughed. One of them, a young administrative coordinator named Kyle Dempsey, actually took out his phone. The woman scrubbing the baseboard did not look up. Her name badge read Dora. She was 28 years old. She had dark circles under her eyes that morning because she'd been awake since 4:30, and her knees ached from the cold floors, and the industrial cleaning solution she used smelled like bleach and artificial lemon, and nothing pleasant about either. She moved the brush in slow, deliberate circles, the same way she always did, because she'd learned early that a job done right the first time is a job you don't have to do twice. Kyle posted the video to the hospital's internal staff group chat with the caption, "Our tax dollars at work, sell pack." 19 people liked it within the hour. Dora didn't know about the post. She was still on the fourth floor. Ridgecrest General was one of the largest private hospitals in the province. 11 floors, 3 wings, a cardiac center, a cancer pavilion, and a neonatal unit that had been featured in a documentary 2 years prior. It sat at the edge of downtown, all glass and steel, and a lobby that smelled like fresh flowers because someone ordered fresh flowers every Monday morning. The staff had grown comfortable there. That's the only way to explain it, really. Comfort is what happens when accountability goes soft. When the people who are supposed to be watching decide that certain behaviors aren't worth the paperwork. Dora had worked there for 6 months. She'd taken the position quietly, through a standard application, using only her first name on the badge as she'd requested during onboarding. It wasn't unusual. A lot of the housekeeping staff went by first names. It was easier, less formal. People didn't ask questions. What they did do was talk. Brittany and Kyle were not alone in their cruelty. They were simply the loudest. There was also Janine Coulter, a senior ward clerk who made a habit of sighing loudly and dramatically whenever Dora's cart came down the hallway, as though the soft squeak of a wheel was a personal affront. And there was Trevor Ashby, a resident who'd once told Dora, directly, looking her in the eye, that she'd missed a spot, and then pointed to a section of floor that was visibly clean. He'd done it in front of 2 medical students. He'd smiled after. Dora had looked at the floor, then she'd looked at him, then she'd gone back to work. That was the thing people noticed eventually, the ones who were paying attention anyway. She never got rattled, never raised her voice, never cried in the break room, or complained to the supervisor, a tired man named Gordon who had 17 staff members and 2 mops that were past their replacement date and genuinely not enough hours in the day. A porter named Elias Fontaine noticed. He'd worked at Ridgecrest for 11 years, and he'd seen a lot of people come through housekeeping, some who burned out in 3 weeks, some who quietly hardened into stone, some who left without saying goodbye. Dora was different. She worked with a kind of precision that seemed almost deliberate. She remembered which patients needed their rooms done early because they had morning procedures. She learned the names of the long-term patients on the 3rd floor and said good morning to each of them. She brought her own tea in a thermos and drank it in the stairwell on her break because the break room smelled like burnt microwave popcorn and she found the stairwell peaceful. One afternoon, Elias found her sitting on the 12th step, thermos in both hands, looking out the small window that faced the west parking lot. "You doing okay?" he asked. "I'm good," she said. "You?" "Gordon told me Brittany filed a complaint, said your cart was blocking the hallway." Dora looked at him. "My cart was against the wall." "I know," Elias said. "I saw." She nodded slowly. "Okay." He sat down on the step below her. They drank their respective drinks in silence for a while. Then he said, "You don't get angry." "I get angry," Dora said. "You don't show it." She looked out the window again. A man was walking across the parking lot carrying a bunch of gas station flowers, walking fast, the way people walk when they're trying not to think too hard about the thing waiting for them inside a hospital. "There's a time for everything," she said. Elias didn't quite know what to do with that. He went back to work. What nobody at Ridgecrest General knew, what nobody was supposed to know, was that Dora's full name was Theodora Callaway-Osei, and that she was the sole beneficiary and executor of the Callaway-Osei Foundation, and that the Callaway-Osei Foundation had 14 months earlier signed a $47 million commitment to Ridgecrest General Hospital for the construction of a new women's and children's pavilion, the single largest private donation in the hospital's history. Her grandmother, Dr. Miriam Callaway, had built the foundation from nothing after retiring from 40 years of practice as an obstetrician. Miriam had delivered over 4,000 babies in this province, many of them in communities that had no other options, many of them without payment because the family couldn't afford it. She'd once driven 3 hours through a February snowstorm to reach a woman who was in labor and alone. That was the kind of woman she was. When Miriam died, she left everything to Dora, not to her son, not to the institution that had given her an honorary degree, to Dora, her youngest grandchild, who'd followed her around hospital corridors since the age of 6, who'd sat at her knee every Sunday while Miriam talked about medicine and dignity and what it really meant to serve people. "You learn nothing about a place," Miriam used to say, "from the top." Dora had remembered that. She'd proposed the idea to the foundation's board of directors herself before the pavilion opened, before the bronze plaque went up, before the ribbon cutting and the speeches. She would work inside Ridgecrest General as a member of the housekeeping staff. Anonymous, no one would know. She wanted to understand the institution she was funding from the inside out. She wanted to know what the hallways felt like at 6 in the morning. She wanted to know how staff spoke to each other when no one important was watching. 3 of the 7 board members had objected. Too much liability, they said. What if something happened? What if someone recognized her? "Then I'll leave," Dora said, "but I don't think anyone will." She was right. Nobody looked twice at a young woman in a blue housekeeping uniform pushing a cart down the hall. Nobody asked her questions. Nobody wondered about her. That was the point, wasn't it? She was invisible. She was supposed to be invisible. And the people who understood that invisibility as a license to be unkind, well, she was paying attention to every single one of them. She had a small notebook in her locker. She wrote things down. The video Kyle posted to the group chat made it to the 4th month of her time at Ridgecrest. By then, Dora had 14 pages of notes. Not a complaint log. Not a record of grievances. Something more precise than that. A study, almost. Patterns of behavior. Who was consistently cold, and who was consistently kind, who ignored the patients who didn't speak English well, who made sure those patients were still attended to, who left their mess in the break room sink, who cleaned it without being asked. The Foundation's board had recently approved the finalized plans for the Callaway-Osei Pavilion, 7 floors, 112 beds, a specialized maternal care unit, a pediatric oncology ward. Groundbreaking was scheduled for the spring, which meant the hospital administration was, at that very moment, preparing for a donor recognition event, a dinner, an unveiling of the architectural renderings. The CEO had been personally coordinating with the Foundation's legal team for 3 months. None of the staff on the 4th floor knew any of this. Kyle Dempsey was showing Brittany the comments on his video post, some laughing emoji, a few lols, one mildly uncomfortable, "Okay, but is this appropriate?" that had been quickly buried. When Gordon walked past and told them the group chat had been flagged by HR. Kyle deleted the post. He looked slightly pink. Brittany shrugged. "It was just a joke," she said. "Sure," Gordon said, and kept walking because he had 17 staff members and 2 mops past their replacement date and not enough hours. That evening, in the stairwell, Elias found Dora again. She looked tired in a way that went beyond the shift. "You heard about the post?" he asked. She looked at him. "The one Kyle." "I heard," she said. He was quiet. "Then I reported it to HR. I don't know if it'll do anything, but I wanted you to know someone said something." Dora looked at him for a long moment. He was a 53-year-old man who'd worked 11 years in a hospital that had never promoted him past his current role, and he'd filed an HR report on behalf of a housekeeping colleague he'd known for 4 months because it was the right thing to do. "Thank you, Elias," she said, and she meant it in a way that she could not fully explain to him yet. The donor recognition dinner was held on a Thursday evening in late March in the hospital's newly renovated boardroom on the 11th floor. White tablecloths, catering from a restaurant in the distillery district. 47 guests, including the hospital CEO, the chief of medicine, 2 city councilors, and several members of the media. Dora arrived in a charcoal blazer and a dress she'd owned since her master's convocation. Her hair was down. She wore small gold earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. The hospital CEO, a polished man named Dr. Warren Fisk, met her at the elevator with an expression of careful, practiced warmth. "Miss Callaway-Osei," he said, extending his hand. "We are so honored." "Thank you, Warren," she said. "It's good to finally do this formally." They walked into the boardroom together. The architectural renderings were displayed on a large screen. The pavilion in full, bright and ambitious. The name Callaway-Osei carved into the rendering of the stone facade above the main entrance. At 7:45, Dora stood at the podium. She spoke about her grandmother first, about the 4,000 babies, about the February snowstorm, about a woman who believed that medicine was not a transaction, but an act of faith. The faith that every person who walked through a hospital door deserved to be seen as fully human. Then she paused. "Before I close," she said, "I want to share something with this room, something I haven't shared publicly before tonight." Dr. Fisk shifted slightly in his chair. "For the past 6 months, I've been an employee of this hospital, a member of your housekeeping staff, working under my first name only. I did this because my grandmother always said you learn nothing about a place from the top. I wanted to understand what Ridgecrest feels like from the inside." The room was very quiet. "I want to be honest with you," Dora said. "I found things that moved me deeply. Nurses who sat with frightened patients long after their shift ended. Porters who learned the names of every long-term patient on their floor. People doing quiet, essential work with profound dignity." She looked out at the table. "And I found other things. A culture in some pockets of this hospital where staff who do the invisible work are treated as though they are themselves invisible, where mockery is mistaken for camaraderie, where cruelty is excused as stress." Someone coughed. "The Callaway-Osei Foundation's commitment to this hospital stands," Dora said. $47 million. The pavilion will be built, but I've asked Dr. Fisk to agree to 3 conditions as part of our amended funding agreement, which he's had on his desk for 48 hours. She looked at Warren. Warren cleared his throat. "The foundation has asked us to implement mandatory dignity in the workplace training for all staff every year. A formal reporting pathway for housekeeping and support staff that goes directly to the board, not just HR, and a staffing review for all non-clinical departments within the next 90 days. "Thank you, Warren," Dora said. She folded her notes. "The people who care for this building make it possible for this building to care for people. That's not a metaphor, that's just true." The morning after the dinner, Ridgecrest General CEO sent a staff-wide email. It referenced the funding announcement, the new conditions, and an upcoming all-staff training program. It did not name names. It did not explain what had prompted the conditions. It didn't need to. Kyle Dempsey read the email at his desk with an expression that Brittany, sitting across from him, would later describe as like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. The video, the post, the woman in the blue uniform. He put it together fast. He sat very still for a very long time. Brittany was quieter that day. Janine Coulter said nothing at all. Trevor Ashby had, coincidentally, his performance review that same afternoon. He came out of the meeting looking like he'd aged 5 years. His supervisor had received a copy of Dr. Fisk's amended conditions and had spent the preceding 2 hours reviewing staff incident logs with new attention. Gordon, who had 17 staff members and 2 mops past their replacement date, received an email from procurement that afternoon approving a full equipment refresh for the housekeeping department. He read it twice. He showed it to Elias. "Someone put in a word," Gordon said. Elias said nothing, but he had a pretty good idea. 2 weeks later, Dora came back to the hospital. Not in a uniform this time. She took the elevator to the 4th floor, the same hallway, the same baseboard outside room 42012, and walked to the nursing station. Elias was coming off a shift when he saw her. He stopped. She was wearing the charcoal blazer, the gold earrings. He looked at her for a long moment, putting things together in the way people do when the world reorganizes itself slightly and they have to catch up. "Dora," he said. "Theodora," she said, "but Dora is fine." He laughed, a short, surprised sound. Then he shook his head slowly. "The stairwell," he said, "all those times." "The stairwell," she agreed. She held out her hand. He shook it, and his grip was firm and warm, and she held it a second longer than a formal handshake required, because some things deserve that extra second. "The foundation is funding 2 new porter positions," she said. "Full benefits. One of them comes with a senior designation." She paused. "I recommended you for it. Formally. In writing." Elias opened his mouth, closed it. "You filed the report," she said simply, "when you didn't have to, when it would have been easier not to." She let go of his hand. "That's the kind of person a hospital needs more of, Elias." She turned and walked back toward the elevator. The 4th floor was the same as it had always been. The soft hum of machines, the squeak of a cart somewhere down the hall, the distant sound of someone being paged overhead. The same hallway where 3 people had laughed at a woman on her knees. The bronze plaque would go up in the spring. It would say, "Callaway-Osei Pavilion," in letters you could read from the street. $47 million worth of stone and glass and promise, carrying a name that 3 people on this floor had never once thought to look up. They'd had 6 months to ask. They'd never once wondered. There are people in every building who hold it together quietly, without recognition, without complaint, and the measure of a workplace is not what it does for the ones at the top. It never was. It's what it does for the ones it assumes nobody is watching. Someone is always watching. I keep thinking about the stairwell. Not the dinner, not the podium, not the moment Warren read out the conditions to a room full of people who'd gone very quiet. I keep thinking about a 12th step and a thermos of tea and a man who sat down next to someone he barely knew and said quietly, "I wanted you to know someone said something." That's the thing about how people actually reveal themselves. It's never the big moments. It's always the small ones when nobody's keeping score. Elias didn't file that report because he expected anything from it. He did it because it was right. That's a rarer quality than most people admit. Doing the right thing when there's no audience, no reward, no guarantee it'll matter. When I think about what my grandmother tried to build her whole life, that's the quality she was really talking about. Not the degrees or the donations or the name on a building. The willingness to act with integrity when it costs you something, even something small. Elias risked a small thing, an awkward conversation, a file that might go nowhere, a label he didn't want, and did it anyway. That's moral courage. Not the dramatic kind, the everyday kind that most people quietly choose against. And then there's what Brittany and Kyle chose. I don't think they were cruel in some deep, calculated way. I think they were thoughtless, which is its own kind of failure. They moved through that hospital for years without ever asking a basic question. Who else is here? And what are they carrying? They had all the information they needed to behave differently. They chose not to use it. That gap between what you know is right and what you actually do, that's where character lives. Or doesn't. I think about that a lot, not just as something that applies to them, as something that applies to me. I had $47 million, and I still spent 6 months learning what the fourth floor smelled like at 6 in the morning, because I understood that resources without understanding are just noise. My grandmother taught me that intelligence isn't just about what you know. It's about knowing what you don't know. It's about being willing to go find out, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means kneeling next to a baseboard in a uniform that doesn't fit right. There's a version of me that could have sat in a boardroom and signed the check and felt good about it, and I would have missed everything important. What I found at Ridgecrest was a hospital full of people who showed up every single day and did hard, unglamorous work without being asked to care, and cared anyway. The patients they checked on, the floors they mopped, the small dignities they extended or withheld. That's where a place actually lives, not in the renderings, not in the press release. Dora is not a name that ends up on a bronze plaque by itself. Theodora Callaway-Osei does. But Dora is the one who earned it. I think my grandmother knew that. I think she knew the name doesn't mean anything if the person carrying it hasn't done the work of understanding, really understanding, what it's supposed to stand for. We don't get to choose who watches us when we think no one is. We only get to choose who we decide to be in that moment. I hope you choose well.